The word Sangha is used in a variety of ways, like mindfulness is used in a variety of ways. Classically, Sangha either refers to the Arya Sangha, those who have awakened to the Dharma at varying degrees, of stream entry, once returner, non-returner, and arhat. When we have our pujas, then part of the wording that we use is taking extracts from the texts that say the 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings. When we are expressing our devotion to the Sangha, it's the Arya Sangha. So it's not, the monastic community is not referred to, but the Arya Sangha, the Sangha as a object of the Triple Gem, is the Arya Sangha. So that's the sort of classical definition of those who have awakened to the 4 levels of awakening. Then another of the more customary, renditions of the term Sangha is the monastic community of nuns and monks, that is the Sangha. More informally than pretty much any Buddhist group around the world, particularly in the West, they'll refer to themselves as a Sangha, which is quite fair. It's not an inappropriate use. To me, there are uses of the word Sangha. It just means a unified assembly. So you can have a flock of birds, can be described as a Sangha. It's a unified group. So some people take exception to the use of lay people using the word Sangha to describe their groups, but to me it seems fair enough. So that it's the community of those who follow the Buddha's teaching, and I would say, and that using either any of those definitions, either the Arya Sangha, those who have awakened to different degrees of enlightenment, or those who have entered monastic life, or those who have taken refuge in the Triple Gem and who consider themselves Buddhists or part of a Buddhist group. And you can also find people that I'm 100% part of this Sangha, but I'm not a Buddhist, which again, fair enough. If you want to be not a Buddhist, then okay. Because people are very shy of limiting themselves by labels. In this country, there was a whole appeal that when they had the last census, I think in 2011, I forget the exact year it was, but there was a circular email that went out around all the different Buddhist groups, like, please tick the box, because they felt there was a large number of people who are actually practicing Buddhists who wouldn't tick the box saying, I am a Buddhist. And so we're trying to get realistic numbers of how many Buddhists there are in this country. So we appreciate that you are kind of not a Buddhist. You don't want the label, but if you practice, if you follow the Buddha's teachings, if you go to Buddhist meditation retreats, if you belong to a Buddhist group, please tick the box. But I'm not trying to make fun of it. I think it's fair enough, because part of the way of life that the Buddha's teaching informs is keeping a perspective on the labels that we use as being a person, being a man, being a woman, being our nationality, our livelihood, our qualifications, and it's like not wanting to be a Buddhist as an identity. It's like, okay, there's a point that is being made there. So I would say you can be part of a Sangha and be not a Buddhist, but it's that sense of taking the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings as a guiding principle in life, and choosing to act and to speak and to form attitudes around the Buddha's teaching. I would say that in some way, shape or form, that's what constitutes one's commitment as a Buddhist. And then Sangha, as I said, it means the unified assembly. Sang, the suffix sang means together or bonded, connected, that which is compounded and that which is collected together. And so that Sangha is definitely the aspect of group, of working together with other human beings and supporting each other and providing that sense of kalyanamitta, spiritual friendship, that is very much a part. So I would say that Sangha, the essence of Sangha, is that quality of kalyanamitra in Sanskrit, or kalyanamitta in Pali, the spiritual friendship, and the strength that comes from that. Obviously I'm a monastic, and I feel that monasticism is extremely important in the West, but I'm not sure about the Tibetan or the Chinese or Japanese, Korean traditions. But in the Theravada world in the West, there's a lot of very prominent, very strong lay groups and lay practice. Most of the prominent teachers out of the southern tradition in the West are lay people. People like Jack Cornfield, Christina Feldman, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, and the most well-known leaders and teachers are lay people. So I feel that the monastic Sangha has a big part to play, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this for more than 40 years. And that that way of that the monastic community has been a vehicle for carrying the teachings through time. I think it's only in Tibet where in the period of time where Lung Dharma sort of banned Buddhism from Tibet, and it was sort of the Nyingmapa underground formed and kept Buddhism alive as a lay practice for several centuries. That I think is a bit of a precedent. Also in Japan, when at the end of the Meiji era, where the emperor made all the monastics get married, or you can either sort of get married or disrobe or lose your head. I'm not sure about losing your head, but it was very strict imposition from the emperor, and so that lay practice and a married priesthood formed in Japan. So understanding that those bodies it has worked in that way, so that Buddha Dhamma has sustained itself without a monastic order based on Vinaya discipline. It has worked for some centuries in Tibet and some century or so in Japan, but there is downsides to that. And I think that when the other orders arose in Tibet, the Sakya and the Kagyu and then the Gelugpa, they came in. A lot of the emphasis was on Vinaya, particularly the Gelugpa tradition and Lama Tsongkhapa, as I understand it, reintroducing the Vinaya discipline in a very prominent way because of things not holding together in a very coherent fashion, and seeing that we need to re-establish Vinaya practice for things to be really healthy. So I think that was part of my limited knowledge of Tibetan Buddhist history was part of the motivation of Lama Tsongkhapa in making that emphasis. So I do feel that there's an enormous part that the monastic community has to play. I lived in America and taught in America for quite a long time in California, and it's quite interesting how oftentimes people forget that the Buddha was a monk. That somehow gets edited out of the picture, that have great respect for his teaching and the practice, the meditation, and when you say, well, the Buddha was a monk. And there's this moment sometimes in conversation, I wouldn't be saying it to sort of shame people or kind of make fun of them, but just like, let's not forget, he did choose to be celibate, to walk around Bihar and Uttar Pradesh barefoot for 45 years and living on alms food. He was a monk. That's how he chose to live. That's not an insignificant part of the picture to me. Other people, that just gets sort of put to one side, and that the emphasis is on the teachings and the wisdom and the skillful practices that the Buddha established. But he was a monk. He lived as a monk. He chose to live as a monk. He chose to establish the monastic order. There wasn't an accident. It wasn't just like a kind of following a custom. He was quite a groundbreaker in many, many respects. He very deliberately crafted the monastic order, the thousands of Vinaya observances and all the major rules. That was very specifically brought into being for very specific reasons. And also that was in the Buddha's own words, that was how the teaching will hold together in a good way over time. So the Buddhas of previous ages, like Vipassana and Sikhi and Vesabhu Buddhas, they didn't establish a patimokkha, they didn't establish a Vinaya discipline, so that their teaching didn't last long. He said in those eras, often the Buddha would just teach mind to mind to their disciples, and that they didn't need a Vinaya discipline. So, but then when they passed away, then the teaching didn't last long. It dissipated like a collection of flowers not held together by a thread. But if you have a Vinaya discipline, then it's like a thread that holds the mala, the garland, together. And so that's 2,500 years later, we still have the Buddha's teaching in the world. We can have a place like this with 60 or 70 people living on alms food, practicing the Buddha's way, and living this life in a, as far as I can tell, very effective and beneficial manner. And so it's kind of amazing. 2,500 years later, in this country, 2,500 years ago, it was still the Iron Age. It was prehistoric Europe. Was the Greeks and the Phoenicians and the Minoans were a bit more organized in the Mediterranean, but here it was definitely prehistoric era, and so you imagine that what was happening here, and the Buddha was teaching and walking and talking in India, and we're able to follow his advice close, as far as we can tell, to how he phrased it 26 centuries later is miraculous, amazing, considering what has, how things have evolved on this patch of ground in those 26 centuries. It's amazing that this institution has sustained itself and can still be valid and vibrant, viable all this time later.